French President Emmanuel Macron has announced the withdrawal of French ambassador and troops from Niger. He says this is in the wake of the July coup that overthrew democratically elected President Mohamed Bazoum. Macron says his ambassador and several diplomats will return to France in the coming hours. He added that military cooperation is also over and French troops will withdraw in the months and weeks to come, with a full pullout by the end of the year. To discuss the significant development, we're joined now by SABC International News editor Sophie Mokoena. A very good evening to you, Sophie. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Let's start with what brought about this. Was it pressure or was it a genuine decision by the French to give back some of the African countries that they've been basically occupying their independence?
You would recall, Sophie, that last week, few days ago, we reported that some West African countries have signed a military pact. And those countries were Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. And therefore, it was clear then that whatever Niger is saying will have to be respected by those who are friends with Niger or operating in Niger. It was a clear message to the French, to ECOWAS, that you touch Niger, we will all support Niger militarily. And therefore, I think after that, it was clear to President Macron that there's nothing that he can do going forward. And he had to give in to the demands of the military government that the French troops must leave the country, and also the diplomats at the embassy of France must also leave the country. You saw previous days that there were lots of people from Niger who kept protesting outside the embassy, the French embassy in Niger. And therefore, it is pressure, nothing else but pressure.
It's interesting also how the French president cites it. He calls it the end of military cooperation. But what I find quite curious, Sophie, is how he says that it is evident that Niger does not want to fight terrorism anymore. How does he justify the statement?
I think he is trying to justify the statement, but it's not necessarily true, because we know that one issue that the military in Niger cited as problematic, it was the fact that much as France is saying it is assisting the military in Niger to deal with issue of the insurgents, it looks like the insurgents are getting even more and more stronger. And there was now even a suspicion that this is the case, because if you have that unstable situation, you know, sometimes it creates a better environment for illicit trade to flourish. And therefore, one thing that they wanted to do, according to them, we don't know whether they will achieve that, was to be in total control of the security of Niger so that they can repel the insurgents. But we don't know whether that will happen. And therefore, I don't believe President Macron when he says it is because the Niger current military government doesn't want to fight terror anymore. They were actually concerned about their security because there were constant attacks, not only in Niger, that whole Sahel region, Mali, Burkina Faso. There are challenges in terms of the so-called terror activities in that country. And you know that this is something that the people of that region have been fighting all along. Therefore, I don't believe that it is because of that. I think President Macron, it dawned to him that time is out and therefore he must pull out his troops and also the ambassador, because the situation was untenable with this military pact that was signed by the three countries last week.
And I'd like to just pick up from what you're saying, Sophie, because it does seem to signal the end of an era for France's occupation of some of these Western African nations and the Sahel region, because he speaks, Emmanuel Macron, that is, about the position on Niger and how they see the current leaders of Niger, saying that France does not want to be a hostage to putschs, meaning the coup leaders. And do you think all of this pretty much spells out what is likely to happen in other countries? Because it would seem that France is quickly losing its influence or allies that it had wanted to put in governance.
Yes, it is very difficult for France currently in West Africa. Many countries are pushing back, and with this latest development, I expect more countries to be even more bold in terms of pushing back. And I think it is going to be difficult for France to continue to have strong military presence on the continent. I think it is not going to be easy going forward. And unfortunately, President Macron is currently a lame duck. I mean, you saw the results of the elections when he was elected. And also today, they were electing members of the Senate. His party did very badly. And therefore, he is even having challenges in his own country. You know that in July, there were protests there. And, you know, it looks like he's really losing control, but you find the right-wing parties gaining traction. And this is something that's happening in most countries in Europe. And therefore, I think I was asking myself, Tsepiso, last week, why he didn't go to the United Nations General Assembly. You know that the 4 members of the P5, that is France, UK, China and Russia, didn't go to the UNGA this time around. They did send representatives. And I was asking myself, normally President Macron doesn't miss these kinds of gatherings because he has positioned himself in Europe as a voice of reason in Europe, taking over from Angela Merkel, who was very influential in Europe. But he didn't go. And now clearly there are lots of issues that he's dealing with. Even the war in Ukraine, he's under pressure. You know, some European countries are beginning to have fatigue of this war. We saw the standoff of the president of Poland and Zelensky at the UN, where the president of Poland lost it, because I think the whole Europe is now tired of this war.
And it seemed even President Joe Biden received a lackluster reception when he was trying to push for more cooperation and resources for Ukraine. But Sophie, let's just get back on track on this Niger issue. The timeline for the withdrawal, President Macron speaking about his ambassadors and high-ranking officials saying by the end of this year, French troops ought to be out of there. Do we know the numbers that we're talking about here?
100 troops that are currently in Niger. And it's obvious it's not easy to pull out because you also have military wear and weapons there. So you have to either take out those capabilities or you have to destroy, and it's not going to happen overnight. But in relation to the diplomats, the officials from the embassy and the ambassador, that can be done, and that is why he's talking about hours. I even suspect that as we speak, he is possibly on his way out, perhaps driving to the next border where he can be able to get a flight. And I think it's happening as we speak. There was no way he could have made that announcement when there are no preparations for the ambassador to leave. And in relation to the troops, that is why I'm talking about it will be a process that will be finished end of the year, because it's not an easy thing to withdraw troops when you've had almost a military base in that particular country. It will take time, because you don't want these weapons that you were using there to fall in the hands of the very same people that you were fighting. And therefore, I think that is the technicality right now. What are you going to do with the military capability that you had deployed in that country? And the vehicles, lots and lots of those heavy vehicles.
Sophie, thank you very much. SABC International News Editor Sophie Mokoena on those latest development coming through. French President Emmanuel Macron announcing that his top diplomats will be leaving Niger, saying that this as France moves to end its military presence in Niger. There certainly is a growing sentiment in the western parts of Africa and the Sahel region to see the back of France and its military occupation in some of those countries. We'll continue bringing you up to speed on that, the impatience there.